If you would have told me 5 years ago that one of my favorite Disney Star Wars projects would feature a character that was only a supporting actor in a previous movie, I would have told you that you're out of your mind and you're absolutely crazy. But now, the tables have turned. Maybe I'm the one who's crazy. So today I've got a special guest to do this review with me. And what better person to do a Star Wars review with than someone who's been a Star Wars fan basically their entire life. Jason, thank you so much for coming with me today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
So before we get started, if you want to give everyone just a brief overview of what your history of Star Wars looks like.
Okay, so gosh, it started back in the mid-'70s when it first came out. I was young. Actually, I remember the first time I saw the Star Wars movie in theaters. It was Return of the Jedi was the first one because of my age, but then I went back and watched all the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the long lines around the movie theaters and everything, but after that I was hooked.
So you can probably safe to say you've been a Star Wars fan pretty much ever since the beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
Cool. All right, so with that out of the way, I want to go ahead and just ask you what your general thoughts about Andor was going into the TV show. This is before it came out. What was your pre-existing notions going into it?
I was a little apprehensive because I didn't know where they're going to go with it because of some of the other things they've done that I felt just didn't meet the mark of what Star Wars should be. But the trailers made it look really intriguing, so I figured I'd give it a chance. And once I got a few episodes in, I was hooked.
What did you think about the other TV shows from Disney Plus, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett? Were you a big fan of those, or did you kind of feel like they were a slight drop in quality?
I think they were a slight drop in quality. I didn't care for Book of Boba Fett that much. I think they could have done a better job. Obi-Wan, I think they did a good job with it. Could have been better. The overall storyline, I think it needed to be told. Then when you go to The Mandalorian, though, I think that was a new benchmark that they sent. And I unfortunately think everybody benchmarked those other off Mandalorian,
right,
which made them fall.
Well, also, if you think about it, Mandalorian was one of the first Disney and Star Wars TV shows that really popularized the volume, which is that big plasma screen that they used to shoot. And I think that was a huge benchmark, like you said, for existing shows after that. But I think they started to get lazy and they started to use that as a excuse to not shoot on location, as opposed to actually using it to complement scenes and stuff like that. And I think that's why I was really excited about Andor coming in, because it looked like everything they shot was on location and it was believable. Like you could tell that the sets that they had already pre-set up were a lot more alive and they felt more lived in, as opposed to it just being slapping a CGI green screen behind you and calling it good, which I felt like Obi-Wan had a lot of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my overall thoughts, just kind of jumping in real quick, I feel like going into Andor, I was definitely just as apprehensive, but I think I definitely had a lot of hope because I could feel the tone being a lot different than what we're used to for a Star Wars project. And with all of the projects starting to fall into the same category of blink and you miss it, you really don't feel like it's something you could get fully into. It's Star Wars by name, but more so it lacks the quality of something you can watch over and over again. Like when I watched Book of Boba Fett, I watched it once and I was like, all right, I'm good to go. I never need to watch this again.
And that's kind of the way I did it as well. I would watch a few episodes, and if it was something that was really great, obviously I was really into it and would continue watching it. But if it wasn't, I would still watch it just for the entertainment factor and just kind of see what I could get out of it. But Andor was one of those where it just kind of grabbed me in and I was like, okay, I can't wait till the next episode comes out.
The main objectives of Andor is to portray a political spy thriller, if you may, which is pretty much Star Wars to a T. I mean, Star Wars is a very heavily political IP, especially with George Lucas having a lot of the intentions that he did, especially with the prequels. This kind of gave you a whole new perspective on what happens when the Empire has full totalitarian
The word Jonah was searching for was totalitarianism. He did not remember the word because he was homeschooled.
But basically, when the Empire has full control, they've won, they have completely entrenched themselves in society. And how did the rebellion basically become the rebellion? And it goes to show that the rebellion actually didn't start out super easily. I mean, you look at the sequel trilogy with the First Order. The First Order just kind of shows up out of nowhere, and they're just kind of like, oh yeah, the Empire's defeated, but we're here. But with this, you kind of see how the Empire got to be such an absolute ruthless dictatorship. And you see the things that people have to deal with behind the scenes that you may not see in the actual Skywalker saga.
Right, and when they start digging down into like Mon Mothma's finances, how it originally started getting financed, I thought that was great. And then how she has to start finding alternative ways to get finance, because they're starting to creep in on that as well. And it just gives you that in-depth view, and everybody she calls in to try to get money from, and everybody that's part of it. I love that.
They made banking look exciting.
Yeah.
That's how you know this is a great show. It makes finances look like extremely gripping.
Yeah.
And I don't know the actress who plays Mon Mothma, but I know she was in a post-credit scene that was, I think, removed in Star Wars Episode 3. And she plays the character incredible. She has all these nuances and just the little eye twinges, or like the forming tears in her eyes, but not being able to actually fully release her emotions. I thought she did an incredible job.
Yeah.
And I think her entire arc was something that if it was in a different show, it may not have been as intriguing. But I think because of the way it was put in, again, it makes that entire, like you said, the finances, the banking, it makes it actually super thrilling, because you don't know how she's going to get away from the Empire, because you feel the noose kind of start to clench a little bit, and she starts to look around and see that the Empire's starting to figure her out.
Yeah.
It was incredible seeing her work her way through that.
Yeah, and then just the family difficulty she was dealing with.
Yeah.
And we can get into that in a little bit later, but just it made me feel so personal. Like it wasn't just this, she was a senator with this great life and a lot of money. She had
A
daughter
deadbeat
problems.
husband. Yeah.
Deadbeat husband. That was just, making cheap shots, and then she was kind of cold towards him. Just felt very personal to me.
A lot of TV shows kind of have the 3 to 4 episode stories, you know what I'm saying, where like they'll bunch a 12 episode TV show into 3 to 4 miniseries. And I think this show is no different, because it does split things up pretty well, where the first 3 episodes you have kind of the introduction of Andor, seeing what he's about, getting into his character, focusing a lot on him specifically and his day-to-day. And then the next 3 episodes are more of the heist, where you deal with all of the planning, the execution, and the conclusion of that whole attacking that Empire base. The other 3 episodes were the prison arc, which I think was the most underrated arc in the entire series, and I think that probably that blew it away in my mind. And then the last 3 episodes, which is kind of the conclusion, the final battle, if you may. And so I think that in a show where they have 3 or 4 very clear arcs, I think each one of the arcs that they did, I feel like they executed very well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because there was maybe just a couple of weeks of that arc, and then the next arc would be just a couple of weeks later. But you didn't feel like it. They transitioned very smoothly through it all.
Like, you don't dwell too long on one specific, where you start to get tired of the arc and you're like, okay, can we move to another planet, please? Like you said, they spend just enough time in there to get fully invested, but then they also know when it's time to move on to what's to come. I know you mentioned earlier about the characters. I feel like every single character in this show, whether it's a supporting character or a lead character, they gave it their all. I mean, when they make me care about some guy who's literally like a mommy's boy, what was the guy who got kicked out of the inspection agency that he was a part of, and then he had to work his way back up to try to track down Andor.
Cyril Karn.
Yeah. So again, he's an absolute piece of crap, and he's not, like, you can't vindicate him at all, but yet they still choose to spend like 10 to 15 minutes of him just eating cereal with his mom. And to some people, they'd be like, oh, that's incredibly boring. But I see that as, you really understand he is a mentally upset person. And when they can make someone like him seem super in depth when it comes to his character, I mean, the rest of the characters just blow him out of the water.
Oh gosh, so Stellan Skarsgård, the actor, he did an amazing job with that, and they gave him so much depth. And some of those monologues that he had were amazing, to the point where, you start to see that, yes, he's part of it, but he's kind of gone too far, but he knows he's too far into it and he can't get out. So he's kind of been made this person that has to do bad things for the greater good.
Right.
And like those last couple episodes where he was willing to sacrifice a whole team of people for the greater good. And even taking on, what's his name?
Saul Guerrero.
Saul Guerrero, yeah. Kind of taking on him in that aspect, and basically saying, yeah, I'm in too far. But this is the way it's got to be. And then when he gets into the space battle, that's a whole nother thing. He's just calm, cool, collected.
Like he had a plan the whole time.
Like he had a plan. Yeah, he developed that specific ship. And it's, the normal Star Wars, this ship was always like broken down. And we didn't know if something was going to work. All his stuff worked immaculately and as designed.
Like, this would be what would happen if the Millennium Falcon actually did its job. Like, if it wasn't a hunk of junk. Like, I mean, Han Solo could get a lot out of it for what he could, but this is what happens when everything is firing on full cylinders.
Yeah, and when he did the laser spin, that did it for me. Yeah.
People say that this show isn't quite Star Wars. It's scenes like that made me go, okay. Like, I remember you and I mentioned before we filmed this that there are individual scenes that remind you, hey, this is Star Wars. It's not going to be lightsabers the whole way through. People aren't using the Force every single episode. Yoda doesn't pop up out of the corner randomly. But there are moments and there are scenes that remind you, hey, even though this is a very grounded take on Star Wars, it very much still is Star Wars.
Yeah, it gives you just enough to remind you.
Exactly.
Which kind of goes into a different point though, because when you looked at the viewership, it was the ratings were pretty low and the viewership was pretty low. And I started thinking about that, and that I kind of understand why, because it was written for a little bit older people, and a lot of the younger people aren't going to watch it.
Right, because it doesn't catch their attention.
Yeah, they can watch it, and it's absolutely suitable for them, but it's not really going to catch their attention with the lightsabers, with the space battles. There's really no interest. They're going to be bored.
Yeah.
Why is this guy sitting here eating cereal like you talked about?
Right.
And why? And there's a lot of fighting, a lot of death. Actually,
right.
And then more so, the stormtroopers can actually shoot.
Yeah.
People actually dying.
You read my mind. That was literally in my notes. I was so excited to talk about that because, like you said, people die. I know that's kind of a nuanced point, but people die.
Yeah.
Like, you know how in so many Star Wars projects, you get shot 5 or 6 times, you walk it off because it's a blaster bolt. These, like, the guys who get shot by these bolts, like, they actually act like you got shot by a gun, and they hit the deck immediately, and they're like smoking a little bit, or like they don't play around when it comes to that kind of stuff. They don't pan away. There's no quick little cuts. Right. When you get shot, it almost follows the body, so it gets you fully like, oh shoot, these blasters are something that should be really feared.
Yeah, and Cassian Andor, he was quick to shoot somebody. And you normal Star Wars, they would almost like hold off. There'd be some sort of monologue, and maybe the guy would get away, maybe he wouldn't, or you wouldn't see the death. He was just like, nope, boom,
shoot first, ask questions later.
Exactly, yeah. And there's just a trail of destruction throughout.
And it's consistent with his character from Rogue One, because remember, the first thing we're introduced to him, he's with that guy, and he realizes that they're not going to make it out alive, and so he immediately just shoots the guy.
Yeah.
Which is completely in line with his character now that we've gotten through this TV series. And that's, again, attention to detail of really knowing a character and being able to stay in line with how we are familiar with that character.
Yeah, and then when you get further into Rogue One, where he's this guy that is quick to shoot somebody, and then he doesn't shoot her dad. It kind of brings it home where, like, okay, so he does.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I just thought about that just now. So he had to actually restrain himself a lot not to do that, because he was on kill mode. But he pulled back because I guess he realized the greater good at that point.
Another thing, back to what we had mentioned earlier about the whole blasters and you actually feel the weight of death. There's even some shocking moments where the young man who we get really accustomed to and really grow to love in the heist arc, where he gets killed immediately by that falling crate of things. Oh, yeah. And he gets killed or it doesn't get killed immediately, but like just like that, you see the look in his eye of, oh shoot, like it's over for me.
Yeah, and that was one of the characters that I had second hope after that, and they brought him, they were going to get him revived, and all that stuff transpired. Because he was a character I wanted to see more out of.
Yeah.
Just some of the lines he had, some of the insight that he had. He was had great lines, great character, and you want, just like every character really, but I wanted to get more out of him. But for whatever reason they didn't, and that we'll see what goes on with that.
I mean, I wouldn't really call it subversive or like a bait and switch, because the character that we had, or the character that we got to spend time with, was a super intriguing character, and I think in their mind he served his purpose.
Oh, absolutely.
He inspired Cassian. He inspired Cassian to be able to take the next step, and that's actually a really good transition, because I wanted to actually really spend a little bit of time on the prison arc. Because I personally believe, I was talking to my wife about this the other day, that I firmly believe that the prison arc is actually what inspires Andor to be the leader that he becomes when he leads up the rebellion in Rogue One. Because when he goes into the prison, he's very abrasive, doesn't like to work with people, he keeps to himself, is super rude. But then when you get through that whole arc, you see him lead an entire freaking prison and inspire Kino. He inspires Kino to turn around and see, if you take a stand, we will stand by you. And so if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the prison arc, because I feel like that needs a lot more attention.
Oh yeah, so while he's in there, he finally realized that probably most of those people in there were just like him and didn't deserve to be in there. And then when you found out the whole, like, oh my gosh, they're never going to get out, they just get transferred to different levels, and that escalates, it just flips a switch in him. Yeah, really. And at that point he's like, okay, we got to get out of here, we got to take some lead and do some better things. And then I think that's really what kind of tops off his disdain for the Empire. Now,
I don't know about you, but I didn't know that Andy Serkis was going to be in this.
No, I didn't.
I had no clue. When I first saw him, I was like, what? Because he technically plays Smoke. He almost plays Snoke. Yeah. He does play Snoke. And so I'm not used to seeing, even mocap actors kind of play a different character in the Star Wars universe, but I'm really glad they did, because I feel like Andy Serkis was really made for this role, because even though it wasn't a super gaudy role, it wasn't like he's not playing a Jedi or something like that, but he gets to use his skills as a motion capture actor, because he has to be expressive with his face. I think they put him in that role to really convey the emotions that he had to process through and go through as the leader of this prison group, as you said, who slowly starts to realize things aren't what I thought they would be. I'm never getting out of here. What do I do with that?
Right, and it just actually helps him, helps you see him, how diversified of an actor he really is, because there's a lot of serious stuff in there. I mean, you see him in Black Panther, which he did a great role there, and he was funny, and he was mean, and he was this bad guy. But in here, he becomes this serious, nuanced guy that runs through a gamut of emotions, and you really see his acting ability in it.
To make us love him the way that we do makes it so much more heartbreaking when we get to the prison escape, where he finally delivers that rousing speech. And this is like 1 out of 27 monologues in this show, where I'm like give these people who write these scripts a raise, because when he first tried to give that half-hearted speech, Cassian's like, you can do so much better. And then he just sits there, and you can tell that he is fully committed to inspiring these people to move up and out. But then when they get to the top and everyone's jumping out and, getting free, as soon as I saw him hesitate, my heart dropped, and I was like, oh shoot, something's not about to go well. Something's gonna go wrong. And then he's like, I can't swim.
Yeah.
To end it like that just broke my heart. But that's like, I hate to say it, but that kind of a negative emotion is good, because we wouldn't care if we didn't care for his character.
Right, and it gives me hope that he may show up in season 2.
Read my mind. The fact that they actually spent some time focusing on the torture of Biggs, that was another surprise, because just like how in other Star Wars movies, they do kind of cut away right before the torture starts. Darth Vader going in to torture Leia, Han Solo getting tortured in episode 5. Every time they're about to do like a torture scene, they're very quick to kind of pivot away. But with this, they actually spend time showing you how the Empire and the ISB torture their victims. It was super shocking to see, because you're not used to seeing Star Wars torture on screen. It gives you a little bit more of an incentive of, oh crap, this is why people are so scared of the Empire, is because they're not afraid to go to the lengths that they do. Where with Biggs, they wreck her. They break her down physically and emotionally.
Oh, yeah, and the doctor they call, and it kind of explains in excruciating detail what's going to happen to her. Like, here's what's about to happen. And she's just like, oh crud, like, and then they actually do it, and the emotion you see on her face and the close-ups, and there's just the blank stares, and you feel that she's been through some torture. She doesn't want it again. Right. But she doesn't want to break.
I actually had one specific question I was going to ask you, and this kind of goes off of what we talked about earlier, but it is a little bit more direct. There's been a lot of talk on social media specifically where people are very much not interested in this show because of what we talked about earlier, of it not feeling like Star Wars. The question I wanted to ask you, again, as a lifelong Star Wars fan, does Star Wars projects in general need lightsaber battles and the Force and the Skywalker family to make it a good Star Wars project?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, this show tells you exactly why, but if you've read a lot of the books, some of those don't revolve around Jedis and lightsabers as well, and they turn out to be really good stories. That has its place with lightsabers and things, but you can actually tell a good Star Wars story, to actually, in my opinion, boost up their other Star Wars stories with the Jedis.
Good point.
And Book of Boba Fett kind of did that. Like I said, I wasn't really a fan of it, but it kind of did that, where it was kind of slow, and then it gave him some background and how he escaped and how he got out, which I appreciated all that. But then it did get into, there was a lot of Star Wars in there near the end, which is okay. I just wish it would have been a little better.
Life is good, but it can be better.
So now going back to the things that we mentioned could use a little bit more work. You had mentioned that there was a couple of things that didn't really sit quite well with you, because again, it's not a perfect TV show. What were some things that you noticed?
So a couple of things I wrote down. So his backstory, the episode where they kind of went back to where he was a child in his camp. There was a lot of foreign languages that they didn't really subtitle the camp, so they didn't really know what they were saying. And they kind of brushed through that really quickly into where he gets taken. I'd like to see a little bit more of that, or really, where those guys were from, and what they really did. Because in my opinion, what they did on that planet wasn't really bad enough to elicit a horrible response from Cassian saying, I hate the Empire.
Right.
It kind of left a lot of that out. And then with that, they take his sister.
Yeah.
And that's where they start the episode, is he's looking for a sister. Then they kind of just stop. Yeah, that's probably my main takeaway there. If I had anything negative to say, that would be it. I wish I would have known more about that throughout the show.
Now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to y'all. What did you guys like or dislike about Andor? Did you think it was boring? Did you think that it was super exciting? Let me know in the comments below. And again, if you haven't seen this yet and you are a die-hard Star Wars fan, give Andor a chance. I cannot say that enough. Jason, thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciated it.
Oh, appreciate it. Loved every second of it.
With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.